Morning, Jason. How's the conditional access rollout going after my last video?
Honestly, Jonathan, I think I've nailed it. MFA's on. We're handling guests better. And no one's complained for almost a week.
That sounds like a new record, Jason. Is there a catch?
Well, there's two small things actually. We employ quite a lot of contractors, and now they can't access Teams anymore. And secondly, someone from marketing managed to access the finance SharePoint site from a coffee shop in Ibiza.
Ibiza?
Yeah, apparently. They're working remotely.
Ooh, Jason. So your conditional access is working. But is it fair to say that it's not quite refined yet? I know, Jason, we can fix both of those problems. Okay, if you saw my last video on conditional access, you will know that we built some solid foundations. We created a baseline, things like requiring MFA for everyone, blocking legacy authentication, and making sure admins only sign in on compliant devices. Now, that's a great starting point, better than a lot of businesses. But as Jason has just shown us, real life can get pretty messy very quickly. You might have contractors who don't have company laptops. You might have staff who travel. And sometimes people accessing data from places they definitely shouldn't be doing. So in this video, we're going to go beyond the basics. I'm going to show you how to do a few things. Firstly, secure your business data when people use personal or unmanaged devices. Secondly, how to handle contractors and temporary staff safely. And thirdly, protecting your most sensitive content, like HR information or finance information, using something called Authentication Contexts. Now, it's all about tightening security for your business without stopping people from getting the work done. Firstly, let's talk about one of the most debated topics within IT security. That is contractors and temporary staff. Now, I don't mean guests. I'm talking about people who have a Microsoft 365 license inside of your tenant, but they don't actually work for you full time. Maybe they're developers, consultants, or freelancers. And here's the problem. I know lots of businesses who don't give them a company device, which means that they end up signing to Teams or SharePoint from their own device. Maybe a laptop you know nothing about, no encryption, no compliance, no control. And if that device gets compromised or left on a train, for example, your company data goes with it. Now, I know lots of IT people who say that contractors or temporary staff should never be allowed to use their own devices. So before anyone starts shouting at me, I want to say this. I agree with you, in principle. But I also work in the real world, and the real world isn't always that neat. Businesses rely on contractors to get things done. So rather than pretending that bring your own device doesn't exist, let's use conditional access to control the risk without killing productivity. So first up, what we're going to do is allow contractors to use your Microsoft 365 only over a browser. We're going to block them from connecting with desktop or mobile apps like Outlook or Teams on their phone. This way, they can still collaborate, but your data never syncs to their unmanaged devices. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, so you'll recognize these conditional access policies if you've watched the first video. So now we're going to talk specifically about contractors. So they're people who have a license in your tenant, so they're slightly different from guests, but they might be using a device that doesn't belong to you, okay? It happens. So what I've done, if I go to groups again, I've created another group called Conditional Access Contractors, okay? There's a few bits to do for this. So if I go to Conditional Access, first I'm going to create my policy. The first thing I'm going to do is obviously give it a name. Okay, say contractors, all apps, block mobile and desktop apps. I'm going to assign this to my new group. Here we are. Select that. I'm going to exclude my break glass group. Okay. Go to Conditions, Client Apps. Yes, we're going to use this feature. So we're going to uncheck, so this doesn't apply to the browser. Okay, click on Done. And then I would block access. Okay, click Select. I'll start it in a report only and I will create this policy. Okay, give that a quick refresh. So what you would also do with this in conjunction is go to SharePoint. So go into here, click on SharePoint, and we go to the SharePoint Admin Center. You will go to Policies and Access Control. And you can see here, look, we've got a section for unmanaged devices. So this is generally a SharePoint thing. The setting you select here will apply to all users in your organization when it comes to devices that aren't managed, okay? You've got three options. You can, if someone's using an unmanaged device, you can allow full access to everything when it comes to SharePoint, okay, which we don't want to do. The other side of that is blocking access, okay, which would make contractors and guests, it'd be tricky for them to access the browser. But if you work in a company that's quite strict, you could block access here. What I'm choosing here is allow limited web-only access. Okay, so that works perfectly with my new policy that I've got here. But what I do need to do is I need to create another policy to complement this. Okay, click on New Policy, give this a name. Okay, it's another long one, but it's for contractors, SharePoint on OneDrive, app enforced restrictions. Okay, we will tag it. Now, if you watched the last video where we talked about guests, this policy could also apply to them. Okay, I'm going to choose contractors to this. And now what I would do as well, I would probably create a replica policy called CA guests, same policy, just tagged in a different group. Okay, click on there. Obviously exclude my break glass again. There we go. Target resources. Okay. We're going to select resources. Click select. Type in here Office 365, which includes SharePoint and OneDrive. Click on there. Go to conditions. This time we're going to go to session. Use app enforced restrictions. Okay. So what does this policy actually mean? So when you apply app enforced restrictions in conditional access, like I've done here, we're essentially telling SharePoint and OneDrive to enforce the access rules inside the browser, not just the login stage. So it doesn't block sign-in, but it's telling SharePoint Online to change what users can do after they've signed in. So instead of just blocking access, we're saying, actually, let them view and edit files in the browser, but don't let them download, print, or sync anything. Okay. So there's 2 or 3 example scenarios where this policy will be effective. Guests, so we're allowing guests on unmanaged devices to view and edit documents online, but we're not allowing them to download or sync them. Okay. Same with contractors on BYOD. They've got a license in your tenant, allow browser access, but there's no local copies going on. And then maybe staff who are traveling. So maybe someone's traveling and they want to log on an unmanaged device. And so again, they can get onto the web browser, allow quick edits, and again, there's no file sync. This kind of splits the world a little bit. A lot of people say just ban unmanaged devices completely, and I absolutely get that. But I know as a MSP owner myself, we've got lots of customers who, if we go to them and say, actually, you need to buy 50 new laptops because, you know, these contractors, we can't have that, then they won't be customers of ours for much longer. So I think when it comes to IT security, you've got to be as strict as you can, but you've also got to be a little bit flexible as well, because this is the real world we're dealing with. So we can exclude these platforms if we like. I will do for that. Click on create. Quick refresh. And there we are. So we've got a couple of policies now for contractors. As I said, I will probably create this one for guests as well. Okay, so it's the same thing, and we covered that a little bit in the last video. So what next? Okay, in our previous video, we talked about risky sign-ins, and this next policy expands that a little bit more. It's called a high-risk user policy. So Microsoft Entra uses machine learning and signals from across the Microsoft ecosystem to detect when an account might be compromised. For example, if the user's credentials are found on the dark web, or if there's unusual activity from their account. When that happens, Entra marks that user as high risk. Dun, dun, dun. And using conditional access, we can respond instantly by blocking access until that risk is resolved. Now think of this like a digital kill switch. The moment Microsoft suspects something is wrong, that account is locked down automatically. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, so in the previous video, we did create a conditional access policy to block high sign-in risk users. That's basically when Microsoft detects that there's a risky login, maybe someone trying to sign in from an unusual country or an unusual device. But there's obviously another kind of risk signal that gets overlooked, and that's user risk. This one's slightly different. Instead of a one-time event, it means that Microsoft maybe has some evidence that the user's credentials have been compromised. For example, maybe their credentials have been leaked on the dark web or something like that. So in this video, we're going to add a second policy that kind of complements the one in the previous video, and it blocks high user risk accounts entirely, okay, until they are remediated. So back in here, we will create the policy, give it a name. Okay, we've got all users, all apps, high user risk, block access. We're going to target all users. We are going to exclude our break glass. We're going to select there, all resources here, conditions. We're talking about user risk. Yes, we will configure. I'm going to select high. You can select other levels as well, but you might be aware that some people getting locked out or maybe shouldn't be, but that's up to you. Access controls, block access. There we go. I will exclude this. I will create it in report only. Okay, give this a refresh. And there we are, look at the top. So we've got high sign-in risk, high user risk. These give us that extra bit of security and they complement each other. Okay, now let's deal with Jason's second problem. Someone in marketing managed to open the finance SharePoint site from a coffee shop in Ibiza? And look, I know what you're thinking. A simple require compliant device conditional access policy would have stopped that instantly. And yes, you're absolutely right. But then you wouldn't learn anything, would you? And I want to teach you about authentication contexts. So this is a good example. Now, think of authentication context like a trigger that you can attach to sensitive content, like the finance SharePoint site, HR, or legal. And that trigger says that when someone opens this, please enforce an extra security rule. So instead of blanketing your entire tenant with high friction policies, you can target specific sites with precision. Now, in this example, we're going to look at the finance SharePoint site at Hawthorne Bell. And we're going to make sure that anyone who wants to access that site must have a compliant device and use phish-resistant MFA. Let me show you. Okay, conditional access. There's another little setting here, look, called Authentication Contexts. And you'll see that I haven't got any, but that's about to change. We'll click on here. We give this a name, okay? It does what it says on the tin. Require compliant device for sensitive data. Now we're going to see how it all fits together later in the video. So click on save. And my authentication context has been created. Now let's go back to conditional access. And we're going to create a policy. And we'll give this a name. Okay, bit of a long one. All users, authentication context, sensitive data. Require a compliant device. Okay. I will target this at all users. I will, of course, exclude my break glass, which is fine. Target resources. So usually we'd select all resources, but instead we'll click on the drop down and we would choose Authentication Context. Authentication Context is used to secure application data and actions, okay, in apps like SharePoint. And here we are, look, this is the one we've just created. So I'll click on there, and then we can go to controls. So, yes, we will grant access, but we want a couple of things to be in place to get access to our sensitive data. I want an authentication strength, which is phish-resistant MFA, so the best form of MFA. And I also want the device to be marked as compliant. Okay, require all of these controls, so both of these. Click on Select. So we've done a couple of things here. We've created our authentication context. We've now created a conditional access policy that says if you want to access our sensitive data, you've got to use a compliant device and phish-resistant MFA. There's one last thing that we need to do. We need to apply this conditional access policy along with the authentication context to the SharePoint sites that we want extra protection on. So for now, I will just exclude these platforms and I will put it in a report only. Okay, in fact, no, I will put it in on this one. Click on create. And that has created my conditional access policy. Quick refresh. There she is. Okay. Now, how do we apply this to SharePoint sites? Well, soon, this isn't in place for this tenant, but soon what Microsoft are going to do is add something in here about conditional access policies. And what we can do, we'll be able to come in here and we'll be able to easily apply our conditional access policy with our authentication context to a specific SharePoint site, because I want to apply it to this one here. But in this tenant, it's not in the UI yet. So it's available in the back end, but that hasn't come through to the UI. So how can I do it at the moment? Well, it's okay, because we have the power of PowerShell, okay, to the rescue. Okay, so here, my Word document, I've got some PowerShell commands. So we connect to our Hawthorne Bell SharePoint site. And then we are going to apply our conditional access policies with our authentication context names to the site. And then we're going to verify that they've been applied. So let's get it going. Let's open PowerShell. Run as admin. There we go. Move this just down here. There we go. I will copy this and I will paste it into my PowerShell. That should ask us to authenticate. There we go. There we are. Let's run this. Make sure you get this completely right. Okay, that has to match the name of your authentication context. So for reference, going back here, it's this one here. So it has to match it. Otherwise, you might get an error. Copy that in there. Okay, that looks good. Now, let's just run this verification command into here. There we are, look. So our URL, our finance site, authentication context, conditional access, and that is the name of our authentication context name. Okay. So what will happen now, if someone tries to access this site here, they will automatically need a compliant device and automatically need phish-resistant multi-factor authentication. Now, I think we should test it. So I'm going to open Chrome. I'm going to log on as Charles Bell. So I'll open a new incognito window. I will go to the login page. So this is obviously an unmanaged device for Hawthorne Bell. So I will enter Charles's email address. Click on Next. Enter his password. OK. MFA. And in Charles's case, he's using a YubiKey. OK. One of the videos I made a couple of weeks ago. So touch that. So now he's into Microsoft 365. OK. He can go to his apps. He can launch his Outlook. All very well. Now, if we just go back to conditional access, we have created some policies in here for staff to require a compliant device, but that's in report only. So that would have kicked in if that was on. Okay, but just to test this one's on. He needs a compliant device, if you remember, to access his SharePoint data. So we will launch SharePoint. And you can see he can get in SharePoint. So there's no problem here getting into SharePoint. If he goes to his main Hawthorne Bell team site, again, there's no problem here. So he's logged in and Microsoft is quite happy. But what happens when he tries to get into the finance site? Okay. Let's open another tab. So remember, he's already authenticated, but he tries to get into finance. And he gets a big fat no, because we've now applied the conditional access policy and the authentication context to the finance site. So this is really good. If you've got confidential data in confidential sites, just apply some authentication contexts. So far, we've covered who can access 365, what they can access, and even how to handle risky users. But there's one more control that I'd like to talk about, and it's worth using. And it's all about how long people can stay signed in. That's where sign-in frequency and persistent browser sessions come in. Now, these two settings work together really well to manage how often users need to re-authenticate and whether their browser remembers them between sessions. Think of it like this. The sign-in frequency decides how long a user can stay signed in before Microsoft 365 asks them to re-authenticate. The persistent browser session, on the other hand, decides what happens when they close their browser, whether they stay signed in or whether they have to log in again next time. So, for example, you might want your staff to stay signed in for a normal working day, maybe 8 hours, but make sure that closing the browser always signs them out. Let me show you how to set that up. Okay, so we're now going to look at our final conditional access policy. And this one is going to fine-tune how long people stay signed in, okay, and what happens when they close their browser. So let's give this a name. Okay, we're going to apply this to all users, browser sessions, sign-in frequency, and I will apply this to all users. I will exclude my breakglass account. What you can also do with this, though, is we could have a different sign-in frequency for admin users. Okay, we could have a different sign-in frequency for guests. Okay, and that would be a good idea. So you could have 2 or 3 different policies which were the same but applied to different groups of users and slightly different settings. Okay. Now, target resources, we will select all resources. That way, it's going to apply across Microsoft 365, so Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, everything. Now, here's the interesting part. Under Session here, this is where we control how long a sign-in lasts and whether users stay in between browser sessions. Okay, first, sign-in frequency. I will select that to 8 hours. Okay. Again, for admins, if you're applying this to admin users, you might select every time, okay, because they've got privileged accounts. So this is what I've chosen here. This means that every 8 hours, Microsoft will ask users to re-authenticate. So this is helping limit the risk if a session token ever gets stolen, for example. Next, I'm going to set the persistent browser session to never persistent. So this is going to disable the stay signed in checkbox when the user signs in. Okay, so closing the browser basically ends their session. And that's it basically. So I will select these two here. I could put that in on, but I will just create that at the moment in report only. So together, what I've just done there, it gives you a nice balance. So users are staying productive throughout the day if they're working on the web browser, but their session tokens will automatically refresh and they're signed out when they close their browser. Refresh that, and there it is. So all these, you've got a nice set of secure conditional access policies. Okay, there you have it. We've now implemented some more advanced conditional access policies. I hope you've enjoyed these 2 videos all about conditional access. If you implement all these policies, your business will be more secure. I have enjoyed today's video. Look forward to seeing you again soon.